kids feeling what I felt. The world ended. I felt like, I felt guilty. What did I do wrong that made my father get up and leave without explaining anything? So,
what's it really like to grow up with a fire-breathing, blood-spitting rock legend for a dad? You might think it's all chaos, parties, and backstage passes, but Sophie Simmons has a story that flips that image upside down. For years, she stayed quiet about the world behind the Kiss makeup. Now, she's finally ready to talk. From strict household rules to surprising emotional confessions, Sophie reveals the side of Gene Simmons the public never saw. One unexpected moment turned the spotlight in a whole new direction. And it's not what you think. So, what happens when the demon goes from center stage to the dinner table? Let's find out. The dual life. Growing up as the daughter of Gene Simmons, the face-painted, blood-spitting bassist of Kiss, might seem like a non-stop ride of chaos and rebellion. But for Sophie Simmons, the reality was surprisingly grounded. In multiple interviews and reflections, Sophie has emphasized the stark difference between her father's outrageous on-stage persona and the man who raised her at home. "People thought our house would be wild, but it was actually strict," she once explained. Despite his fame as a theatrical rock icon, Gene was a teetotaler who never drank or used substances and maintained a household centered on discipline, structure, and traditional values. Bedtimes were enforced, academics came first, and respect was non-negotiable. Sophie often shares that fans would be shocked by how conventionally her father parented. While the world saw Gene Simmons as the demon of Kiss, at home, he was a man fixated on responsibility and routine. The Simmons household wasn't a playground for celebrity excess. It was a space where schoolwork, chores, and personal accountability took precedence. Gene's immigrant background, particularly being the son of a Holocaust survivor, heavily shaped his approach to parenting. His mother, Flora Klein, instilled values of perseverance and self-discipline in him, principles he passed on firmly to his own children. Gene was not merely parented performatively, there were expectations. Sophie's father wouldn't give a penny without continued effort. An anecdote she told about him very much like what he often said, "I'm rich, you're not." He believed that they could not be depended on to achieve anything for themselves, as children relying on the success of their father, and as such, his children should know rich versus poor from the work they invested. The background was thus one of tough love for Sophie, allowing her to discover self-worth independent of her father's fame. He shielded even his children bearing reality TV and rock tours from entitlement as he embedded a solid work ethic into their daily lives. Sophie's in her 30s now. She reminisces on the unusual upbringing that has laid down such strong foundations for adulthood. Life for Sophie is credited to the rules and values her father instilled in her, even though she acknowledges growing up privileged in a very high-profile family. Between the exposure given in public and the private discipline, for Sophie at least, she has learned how to find balance, much like others would from the difficulty of reconciling their everyday experiences into one. Indeed, Sophie was not just molded by her father's use of terrifying audiences, but by being raised in a family where order applied, even though family came first. That's how she defines independence and success, or rather, herself. But behind the strict routines, something more complicated was unfolding. Behind the demon mask. Despite the glitz and spectacle that came with having Gene Simmons as a father, Sophie Simmons has opened up about the emotional cost of growing up with a parent whose career often came before family time. In a revealing moment from the script, Sophie recalls feeling confused and even guilty during childhood when her father would leave suddenly for tours or business without any real explanation. "What did I do wrong?" she remembered thinking. An innocent question that reflected a child's attempt to make sense of an unpredictable world shaped by fame. These early experiences highlight a less glamorous side of life in a celebrity household, where long absences could feel like abandonment to a child who didn't yet understand the demands of international stardom. While Gene Simmons was known worldwide for his fearsome stage presence and rock persona, at home, his unpredictability created emotional voids that Sophie had to learn to cope with. The larger-than-life image of the demon often overshadowed the reality that, like many children of public figures, Sophie sometimes simply missed her dad. Unlike most fathers, who might return home after a 9-to-5 job, Gene could disappear for weeks or even months due to tours, interviews, and business deals. Sophie's feelings of guilt and sadness were made more difficult by the public nature of her father's job. She often had to share him with millions of fans while craving his time and attention as a daughter. His absence came with a lot of miscommunication, and it just made emotional things worse. She understood that her father did not exhibit his behavior because of the intense, grueling demands that the exhausting task of maintaining the Kiss empire imposed on her. The hard-won work ethic and tenacity for success that Gene later passed on to his children cost him the emotional absence when he first became famous. Sophie has come to realize that his father's immigrant background was greatly associated with the way he was traumatized in his own upbringing, with these priorities of stability and provision over emotional expression. Nevertheless, there have been parts of her relationship with her father that have changed. At her wedding, Gene walked Sophie down the aisle, and the proud father made an emotional speech about how proud he was of the woman she'd become. These incidents are suggestive of a change from emotional distance to connection, implying that time, maturity, and mutual understanding helped them bridge their gaps formed in earlier years. Sophie's story is a potent reminder that behind the mask of a rock legend, there exists a human being. And somewhere in the world, behind the child of a celebrity, an emotional journey is often being trudged, although seldom mentioned. Fame at the school gate. For Sophie Simmons, childhood wasn't just about school projects and after-school activities. It was also about managing the surreal reality of being Gene Simmons' daughter. While most kids only had to deal with the usual schoolyard drama, Sophie's social life came with an added layer of spectacle. In interviews and reflections, she recalls being approached by classmates and even teachers who were more interested in her father's Kiss persona than in getting to know her. "Your dad spits blood?" friends would ask with a mix of shock and awe. What others viewed as cool or fascinating often left Sophie feeling exposed and uncomfortable, especially at a young age. The contrast between her everyday life and her father's extreme public image made even normal social interactions complicated. Sophie once admitted that, as a little girl, she was initially afraid of her dad's onstage character, describing the demon makeup and blood-spitting act as scary. That fear soon turned into embarrassment when classmates began associating her with the theatrical elements of Kiss. School events, like parent-teacher conferences or talent shows, were never low-key. Gene's presence alone could steal the spotlight, making it hard for Sophie to just blend in or feel normal. Even simple outings to the mall or restaurants could turn into public fan encounters, forcing Sophie to mature quickly and learn how to navigate the attention she didn't ask for. He was meant to be an artist, but in an utterly different arena, and playing his own tune. One sorely cringed for the child girl growing up with an artist of their father's stature. It is strange. During the common years of growing up, there should have been easygoing luxuries. Being a giggling little ankle-biter of a daddy's girl, putting on the most outrageous tantrums in front of public, as well as giving heavy artillery compliments to their fathers during their most not-daddy moments. offering do-know-whats with the artistically privileged ladies. Public life is just his job now, she eventually reasoned with herself, accepting him with strange but relevant meanings of his every stance. Alongside being an awkward high schooler, this evil one had to balance the being of a daughter of a fire-breathing rock god, commented Sophie. Weird as it is, Sophie places credit for her upbringing with cultivating a resilience all her own. Publicity, she'd learned early on, does two things. It keeps you from losing touch with your own inner core, and it teaches you how to set boundaries and manage rejection. By the time she wanted to make her own way in music and activism, she'd already ridden through the obstacles of growing up under Sophies, with the ability to laugh off awkward stuff and turn years of school experiences into strength. It shows a hefty amount of emotional development for a girl whose resolve not to be sidelined is actually simply to be known for who she is, not most recognized for the daughter of a rock icon. Cameras in the living room. When Gene Simmons' Family Jewels premiered in 2006, it offered viewers a front-row seat to the daily life of one of rock's most iconic figures and his family. For Sophie Simmons, who was just a teenager at the time, the experience of growing up with cameras constantly documenting her life was anything but ordinary. Spanning 7 seasons until 2012, the reality show captured everything from family vacations to personal milestones, all while Sophie navigated the complex terrain of adolescence. In later interviews, Sophie admitted, "It was weird, but it was also our normal," encapsulating the unusual duality of living both a public and private life under one roof. Despite the glamour and excitement the show projected, Sophie has revealed the deeper impact of growing up in the public eye. Filming her teenage years for a national audience meant that many typical coming-of-age experiences, dating, arguments, awkward phases, were no longer private. Sophie has spoken about how this shaped her views on fame and personal boundaries. While the show allowed the Simmons family to share genuine aspects of their dynamic, it also required Sophie to grow up quickly. She became aware early on of how narratives are shaped in media, learning to distinguish between her real self and her TV self. However, to Sophie, one blessing from the whole experience was her insight into the true entertainment industry. Watching both her parents, but mostly her father, in making production decisions and managing public image became a masterclass in media literacy for Sophie. She credits this time with teaching her about editing, branding, and the artificiality of celebrity culture. All such learning later influenced her career decisions, particularly the sobering choice to pursue music and activism on her own terms, completely away from a world of fame and the shadow cast by her family. It provided her with a healthy dose of skepticism toward the limelight, along with an authentic self to carry through for most of her career moves. Today, Sophie views Family Jewels with a sense of appreciation, but also complexity. In an interview, she expressed gratitude for how the show brought her family closer, while also acknowledging how taxing it could be to have so many personal moments on display. "The show helped us bond, but it was also hard," she reflected. Sophie's ability to find balance between media exposure and personal identity is a testament to her growth. While many child stars struggled with early fame, Sophie used the experience to build resilience and to define who she is beyond the camera lens. Dating under watch. Dating as the daughter of a rock legend is a challenge few can truly relate to, and Sophie Simmons has never shied away from sharing how daunting it was for potential suitors to cross paths with her famously intense father. Gene Simmons, known to millions as the fire-breathing demon of Kiss, carried his larger-than-life presence into nearly every aspect of Sophie's life, including her early relationships. In her own words, he's always been very protective. "When I started dating, it was an experience for everyone involved." That understatement hints at just how intimidating it must have been for young men to try to win the approval of a man who once spat blood on stage for a living. Sophie has shared amusing and awkward stories about introducing boyfriends to her father, with many understandably nervous to meet a rock icon with a fierce reputation. Even without the stage makeup and pyrotechnics, Gene's commanding presence and no-nonsense approach to parenting made it clear he wasn't someone who could be easily impressed. Despite his fame, Gene took his role as a protective father seriously, often laying down boundaries and expressing concerns about who his daughter spent time with. Sophie revealed that these encounters were often a source of stress not only for her dates, but for her as well, as she tried to balance her personal life with her family's intense public identity. It is interesting how Gene's protectiveness stemmed not only from possessiveness, but also from the very values that he imparted to Sophie: independence, self-respect, and emotional intelligence. He wanted his daughter to be with a man who could truly see beyond her last name and show her genuine respect. Over the years, Sophie came to understand her father's views, even when she occasionally found him a bit suffocating. The early experiences helped her discern true relationships versus fame or parental scrutiny. Partners who wouldn't bow down to either were important to her. By 2023, for Sophie, the wedding was a moment that gave the world an alternate view of Gene Simmons, whatever happened to that demon, into that image of a deeply emotional and proud father. Pictures and interviews from the intimate backyard ceremony at the Simmons family home showcased the more sentimental side of Gene as he walked Sophie down the aisle in tears, celebrating the beginning of her new life. That moment had come to symbolize more than just a marriage. It represented the turning point in the journey of their relationship. From scary boyfriends to the father who supported her choice for a husband, Gene's evolution as a father showed that beneath that armor of the stage was just a dad who wanted nothing but the best for his daughter. As challenging as dating was, it was only one part of a much bigger legacy. Kiss Royalty Unite. Growing up as the child of a rock legend is a unique experience, one that comes with its own set of pressures, privileges, and identity struggles. For Sophie Simmons, that experience was made more navigable through her connection with others who understood it firsthand, including Evan Stanley, the son of Kiss frontman Paul Stanley. The two essentially grew up alongside each other, part of what fans affectionately refer to as Kiss royalty, children raised under the immense shadow of one of the most iconic rock bands in history. Their shared backgrounds created a natural bond, a sense of community among kids who were often the only ones in their schools dealing with red carpets, tour buses, and the scrutiny that comes with fame by association. Sophie and Evan both appeared on Gene Simmons' Family Jewels, giving fans a glimpse into their dynamic. While their appearances were brief, they reflected a close-knit circle of friends who leaned on each other as they carved out their own identities. In interviews, Sophie has hinted at the comfort that came with having friends who got it, who understood what it was like to constantly have to prove themselves and avoid being dismissed as simply the child of. These relationships provided not only emotional support, but also encouragement as they each pursued careers in music, entertainment, and personal development, separate from their parents' legacies. The decisions taken by Sophie and Evan have been well planned and considered to carve out individual creative paths. Just as Sophie has taken her own strides in pop and alternative music, Evan Stanley crafted his own musical career, wholly independent of his father's glam rock standards. With their travels, they wonderfully converge into one theme: honoring their past, yet stretching it. They are often heard giving credit to their celebrity parents for opening doors that might otherwise have closed, but are equally quick to emphasize the grueling work that it takes to make one's mark as a credible artist. It's an unspoken thing between rock kids that has created a kind of quiet, supportive community promoting authenticity over legacy worship. In recent years, as KISS nears the end of the road for its tours, the next generation will start to be gently illuminated. Whereas Sophie and Evan are not attempting to recreate the KISS empire, they carry forth the spirit of originality and boldness in their own way. Extended members of the KISS family have often come together at occasions like Sophie's 2023 wedding and other public landmarks, reminding fans that there is a true, living legacy beyond stage makeup and theatrics, one based on connection, creativity, and resilience. Building her own brand. While Sophie Simmons could have easily coasted on her father's legacy, she made an intentional decision early in her adult life to create a career based on her own identity, not Gene Simmons' fame. "I want my music to speak for itself," she has said, emphasizing her desire to be recognized for her own talent, not her last name. This mindset guided her as she stepped into the music and entertainment world, not as an extension of KISS, but as a unique voice blending pop, soul, and emotional honesty. Sophie's work as a singer-songwriter has steadily earned respect in its own right, with critics and fans acknowledging the strength of her lyrics and vocal delivery, separate from the theatrical world her father helped create. Her artistic choices reflect her broader push for authenticity. Instead of replicating her father's brand of spectacle-heavy rock, Sophie pursued a more minimalist and personal approach. She collaborated with producers and writers on emotionally resonant tracks like Black Mirror and Love Turns Lonely, which showcase vulnerability and real-world themes. These songs diverge from the bombastic sound of KISS and instead represent a contemporary, introspective sound that Sophie felt truly reflected her. By staying true to herself musically, she not only gained creative control, but also established credibility in an industry that can be quick to label children of celebrities as products of nepotism. Sophie has also been frank about the double-edged situation of her famous family name. In interviews, she explained that knowing Gene Simmons may open some doors, but it also puts heightened expectations on her and raises skepticism. "It is a blessing and a curse," she had once said. This sort of honest admission says a lot about the pressure she really is under to forever prove her acceptance in the industry, something that a lot of second-generation stars deal with. Instead of running away from her background, however, Sophie uses it as an inspiration to create something that is truly her own. Her time on Family Jewels has given her a behind-the-scenes education in media that she is now putting to use with a business-savvy approach. Today, Sophie is continuing her journey as an artist, a writer, and an advocate. She has built a career that expresses her values and creative vision, working hard to ensure her voice is heard, apart from the legacy she was born into. Through music, public speaking, and social activism, her approach to all she attempts is clear and concise. Sophie's path illustrates the possibility of forging an authentic identity while bearing the weight of the global brand. But this is only attainable by perseverance, skill, and the courage to make it on your own. Lessons from a rock mogul. While Gene Simmons was strict at home and larger-than-life on stage, one of his most lasting influences on Sophie came through sheer exposure to his work behind the scenes. Gene wasn't just a performer, he was a relentless strategist, building KISS into one of the most profitable bands in music history. From merchandise deals to licensing empires, Gene treated every opportunity as a calculated business move. Sophie, growing up in the middle of it all, witnessed firsthand what it meant to manage a personal brand at a global level. This passive observational education was crucial. She didn't just learn through lectures, but by watching her father conduct real business at the highest level. Rather than pushing his children into the spotlight, Gene showed them what it meant to sustain a career behind the curtain. Sophie watched her father analyze contracts, negotiate deals, and think years ahead in terms of marketing and intellectual property. These moments, often happening around the dinner table or at the family office, gave Sophie a clear understanding of the importance of ownership, branding, and long-term vision. Unlike traditional music households focused solely on artistry, the Simmons home functioned as both a creative space and a boardroom. It became natural for Sophie to think of her music career not just as art, but as a business. That influence started really showing when Sophie's first independent projects got underway. Like many others, Sophie, however, was also quite skilled in the deal-making business. It is interesting for someone to know how to self-represent. Protecting creative rights while using every opportunity without overexposing and making sustainable decisions for future endeavors were among the learning processes. Be it music, representation, media, anything more of an executive view over talent has been right on the money, as it has been borrowing a lot more from what she has seen her father transforming theatrics to enterprise. What makes Sophie's story different from others is her ability to fuse the lessons learned in business with her own values. However, she inherited not Gene's public bravado, but his calculated ambition. As she continues her career development, Sophie proves that knowing the machine of success is as important as the performance itself. Her entrepreneurial instincts, wedded to her authentic artistry, reflect the modern understanding of celebrity: visibility versus control, creativity versus ownership, and fame versus purpose. Gene's evolution through Sophie's eyes. Gene Simmons may be best known as the fire-breathing, blood-spitting demon of Kiss, but to Sophie Simmons, he's always been something far more personal: a protective, principled, and ultimately loving father. Over the years, Sophie has spoken about the contrast between her dad's fierce stage persona and the man who enforced strict bedtime routines, emphasized academic discipline, and reminded his kids that wealth didn't equal entitlement. From her childhood to her adult life, Sophie has witnessed her father evolve, not just professionally, but emotionally, growing into a parent who learned to balance expectations with tenderness. Throughout her upbringing, Gene maintained a stern parenting philosophy rooted in self-reliance and responsibility. His famous declaration, "I'm rich, you're not," wasn't just bravado. It was a life lesson in independence that Sophie credits for shaping her strong work ethic. However, beneath the tough exterior was a father who genuinely cared about his children's growth and happiness. As Sophie matured and built her own identity, Gene gradually became less of a taskmaster and more of a supporter, especially as she made decisions about her career and personal life that diverged from his own rock and roll path. However, this transformation became very apparent during Sophie's wedding to James Henderson. The backyard of the family home was turned into the venue for the intimate Beverly Hills ceremony, which, instead of as a rock father's iconic image, revealed a rare glimpse of Gene Simmons as an emotional, proud father. He walked Sophie down the aisle with tears in his eyes, then later referred to the day as one of the most emotional days of my life. In interviews, the once feared man under whose protection Sophie's boyfriends were kept, and who cast an image of a strict, no-nonsense, made a revelation of his vulnerable side in an interview later. A father so deeply touched by his daughter's happiness and development. Through Sophie's eyes, Gene Simmons' transformation from a larger-than-life rock star to that of a devoted dad really tells how he underwent a metamorphosis rather than a contradiction. It shows that time, love, and family have the ability to soften even the most theatrical and intimidating figures. The Sophie, who lets her speak of both the strict and sentimental sides of her father, gives a more rounded sense of Gene. A man who, behind all the makeup and fame, learned all along how to love better and ever more openly. As her father softened with time, Sophie was stepping forward in a way no one expected. Sophie steps into her own. In February 2023, Sophie Simmons took center stage in a way that had nothing to do with her famous last name and everything to do with her own journey. Her wedding to longtime partner James Henderson was a deeply personal affair, held in the backyard of her parents' Beverly Hills estate. Far from a flashy celebrity spectacle, the event was intimate, emotional, and filled with meaning. Sophie told people that she and James wanted their wedding to reflect the love we share and not the size of the guest list, highlighting her desire to remain grounded and authentic even while in the public eye. For someone who grew up with cameras rolling in family jewels and fans always nearby, the wedding was a moment where Sophie claimed her own spotlight on her own terms. The ceremony was attended by close family and friends, including Gene Simmons and Shannon Tweed, who had just celebrated their own 40-year relationship. Sophie's parents were not just spectators, they played meaningful roles in the day. Gene walked Sophie down the aisle, visibly emotional as he gave his daughter away. In behind-the-scenes footage shared with Entertainment Tonight, Gene called it one of the most emotional days of my life, offering a rare glimpse of the soft-hearted father behind the iconic demon persona. It was a significant shift from the intimidating, protective dad Sophie's suitors once had to face, showing his evolution into a man proud of the strong, independent woman she had become. A pinnacle in their life, the wedding hardly stayed a family milestone. It symbolized Sophie making her own identity in the Simmons legacy. After years of hard work to carve a career on her own, rather than following in her father's footsteps, Sophie only solidified her message of independence via her wedding vows. She put on casual elegance, not celebrity glitz, and kept the spotlight firmly on her relationship rather than her father's fame. Partaken were handwritten vows and custom-designed decor, an interesting blend of her taste and her Canadian-American roots, personal touches she brought into an event. This is the kind of thoughtful, intentional type of day that reflected Sophie for who she has always strived to be: grounded, self-directed, and true to herself. The wedding function of Sophie reminds everyone that she not only belongs to the glorious position of daughter of a rock star, as Gene Simmons is famous as a member of KISS, or an identity more broader identity than that. It turns over a new leaf in terms of personal as well as public reputation. Fans who have been witnesses to her entire lifetime, both on Family Jewels and her music career, must be really excited to see what it feels like to be celebrated as Sophie rather than Gene Simmons' daughter. Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed this look into Sophie Simmons' life behind the fame, don't forget to like this video, leave a comment with your thoughts, and subscribe for more untold stories from the world of entertainment. And don't go anywhere. Check out the next video on your screen for more fascinating behind-the-scenes moments you won't want to miss.